Okay, good morning. I'm going to try to wrap up some of we were handling a lot of shaylas about women, b'chlal, wise women, befrat. I want to try to wrap it up. There's really enough to go for a few more weeks, but I want to get something in about Hanukkah, closer to Hanukkah, so let's try to wrap it up today. The shayla that I wanted to handle is, it's a very modern thing, it's a very modern invention, l'chayra, is women giving Hespedim. I don't know if anybody's ever been in a Levayos that had a woman masped.
Yes.
You were? Of course. But it's a very modern, relatively modern thing. Now, I want to talk about a few historical occurrences, and then we'll talk about the shayla a little bit. Now, there's, Chazal say, I feel a Cemeteries shebehechel tali b'mazel. Right, even a Cemeteries tali b'mazel, and that applies to Gedolim, to their Svarim, there are some Gedolim who are Gedolei Olam, who everybody in their contemporary time considered them to be mamish, from the Gedolei Hadar, and today they come out unheard of. One of those Gedolim like that is someone by the name of Rabbi Yasala Posner. He was the Rav in Posen before Rabbi Kiveger. Rabbi Kiveger in a tshuva writes about him that Kemat Nevuah Haisabai. Rabbi Kiveger writes this about him. Rabbi Kiveger writes Rabbi Yasala Posner, Kemat Nevuah Haisabai. Rabbi Kiveger tells a story that when Rabbi Kiveger was in Gaman, he sent a few shaylas to Rabbi Yasala Posner, and Rabbi Yasala Posner didn't answer him. And eventually Rabbi Kiveger one time found himself in Posen, and he asked Rabbi Yasala Posner, he spoke to him in learning, and Rabbi Yasala Posner was very nice to him. He gave him a lot of time, he really enjoyed him. Rabbi Kiveger mustered up the courage, and he said, if I could ask, you seem to like me. How come you don't answer my shaylas when I write you shaylas? And Rabbi Yasala Posner told him, as if it kommen dort, that you can't send answers to everybody who asks. If you'll come, and Kiveger said, Taka, a short time later, Rabbi Yasala Posner was nifter, and Kiveger was brought in to be the Rav in Posen. So Kiveger said, it was like Kemat Nevuah, that he told me, like, don't worry, when you come and take this job, you'll understand how difficult it is, and you'll like he was warning me. The Neidah Behuda, for example, who was Rabbi Yasala Posner's father-in-law. Rabbi Yasala Posner was married to Neidah Behuda's daughter. Neidah Behuda writes about him in his chuvas. He says, I'm afraid to send you, Rabbi Yasala Posner used to send the Neidah Behuda all his grace shaylas. The Neidah Behuda writes back, I'm afraid to answer you, because I know that whatever word I say, you're going to be baidik in the database of Shas Upaiskim, Rishonim, V'achronim, and I shudder to think what you're going to find that's going to, either stem with what I say or not stem with what I say. This is a Neidah Behuda writing to him. So we're talking about someone who's, on the highest tier of Gedolei Yisrael. And today, nobody knows about him. His Svarim were very, very little bit published. There's a Shaylas Shuvah Sefer called She'eris Yosef, I think. That's a few of his Shuvahs. Later on, recently, some of his great-great-great-grandchildren put a Chedushay, Rabbi Yasala Posner al Shas. It's a few shtickle here and there. It's a very, very small thing. Now, there's something very interesting about his life. This is a legend, but his Einichels bring this down in the biographical part of the book, of the Sefer. I heard it as a kid, and then I found it more recently, as follows. Rabbi Yasala Posner's wife, try to say this in the most diplomatic way possible, was abusive to him. Abusive. She used to yell at him, berabim, always. He would be giving a drasha in shul, and she'd be sitting there as a nashim, and if he said something that she didn't like, she would shout out, Yasal, Yasal, nishtazoi, and she would correct him. When he'd be involved in the Din Torah, sitting with the men with the Din Torah, she was known to barge in sometimes and give him musar, so about something, some trivial matter. She would interject when he was talking to Chachamim, Talmidei Chachamim. This was a known thing, that his wife was very, very strong on him. As a matter of fact, there's a story that they bring down over there, interesting story, that she was one time lighting candles on the table, his wife. I think she was a Nida at the time, and her sleeve caught fire, and it was like some fire was licking up the side of her clothing, and Rabbi Yasala Posner didn't know what to do, and he screamed, fire, fire, Hatzilu, and people came running, and they put out the fire. When the fire was out, she tells him, Yasala metayet tzidkus, kemat verbrent geworden. Like, you're being a tzaddik now, I almost got burnt up. You didn't put out the fire yourself, I almost got burnt up. And he told her, I was sure that the Neidah Behuda vet nishlazen as an tochter should be verbrent. So this is his Einichel bring down the story. Like I'm sure the Neidah Behuda wouldn't let his daughter be burnt up. They had a very interesting relationship. Now, when he died relatively young. I mean, for those days it wasn't so young. He died, I think, at 64, 65 years old. His Talmidim were sitting around his mita. They were making some sort of levay over there, and his wife barged in, and she said, "I want to talk. I want to say about him." And the Talmidim all looked at each other. It's like, not enough. You mevazim b'chayev, you mevazim b'moisei. Also, when's enough? When's it enough of this? And she says, no. And she stood up by the bima, and she got up and she gave a hesped of Yasal Slutzka. And she said, I want to read it for you. She says, She says, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yasel, Rabbi Yasel. She says, Rabbi Yasel, Rabbi Yasel, Zog far noilam, tell everybody here that I was just doing what you asked me to do, and that I was never mavazi. And she continues, tell them, because they don't know, that when you were a young man who was Edi L'Gdula, and you married me at 13 years old, and everybody was talking about you, that you were going to be the Goyin Yisrael, and you were going to be Yehuda's new Eidim, and you were mamash, the biggest thing you told me, make sure to always, push me and chapel with me and sit me so that I should be kept humble. Tell them that I did this all because of you, and tell them how hard it was for me and that I didn't want to do this and I did it only because you asked me to. And the legend has it that Rabbi Yosef Slutzker sat up in his bed. Let me tell you exactly how they say it. He lifted up his head. Rabbi Yosef lifted up his head and he nodded to the Hesped of his wife on him. So this is like a wild story about someone that's today came out an unknown person, but was from the Shuri Shayin of the Gedolim. He was, like we said, the night the son-in-law, Rebbe Kveger Stella before Rebbe Kveger. This is an example of a woman giving a Hesped by her husband's Levaya. Now, granted, it's a very out of character, example. It's not what you would call regular Bechlal, but I think it's ironic that one of the more recent examples of a woman, we have to be careful how we say the words, not Hesped, but a woman giving some sort of something by her husband's Levaya, was by the Satmar Rebbe's Levaya. Rabbi Yoelish, by his Levaya, he was married to Rebbetzin Altefeiga. She was the one who started Satmar Bikachelim. She was a very, very powerful person. She raised copious amounts of money for Satmar Moistis and for other things. And as he was becoming more debilitated at the end of his life, she took up more and more space. She ran the Chatzar. She was, we're not talking about the Rebbetzin now and the Bnei Yoel and whatever. Satmar politics, I'll leave for people who know more about Satmar than me. But suffice to say, there was something going on over there in the Satmar Chatzar with the Rebbetzin and the Gaboim and etc. By his Levaya, and this is reported in all the newspapers of the day. It doesn't say that she gave a Hesped, but it said she came up to the Mita by the Levaya. The Levaya was like 6 or 7 hours long. It was a long Levaya. Crazy traffic jam on the New York 17, like a historic traffic jam on the New York 17 because he was buried in KJ. You could look this all up. This is in the report in the newspapers. She came to the thing and she squeezed herself amongst the men. She put her hand on the Mita and she called out loudly, Rabbeini HaKudosh, be Meichel me, or and she told everyone how heilig he was. Like a little, you wouldn't call it a Hesped. She wasn't in the line of the Maspidim, but she definitely was Maspid him, by the Levaya with her hand on the Mita. And people who were there, I've heard from people who were there, it came off as a Hesped. I don't want to call it a Hesped, don't call it a Hesped, it came off as a Hesped. I just think this is ironic because the tshuva that most preserves, or that in the most detail goes through the shaila of women being Maspidim, is in the Divrei Yoel. Meaning there's very few tshuvas throughout the Paiskim about women giving Hespedim. It was such a rare occurrence that there's very few tshuvas about it. The tshuva, the one who has an actual, a whole tshuva about the Indian is the Satmar Rebbe. The Satmar Rav, years earlier, in 1936, he wrote a tshuva to the Rav of Grosvedain, Rav Yosef Schwartz, a whole tshuva about women giving Hespedim. So now I want to go into this Indian a little bit. Now what's interesting over here is that Be'etzem, Midina de Gemara, it sounds like women gave Hespedim. There's a Mishnah in Moed Katan and Daf Chav Chesam Beis that says as follows. It says, Nashim b'mayid ma'anes avalei metapches. It talks about women participating in funerals on Chol HaMayid, and it says they could be ma'anes, which means they call out, they shout out, they cry out. But le metapches, they don't do the slapping or making some sort of noise that they would do, because that's too avelistic. Now the Gemara goes on, and the Gemara describes, it says, my amran. Now, this is an important deek, because there are those, Satmar Rebbe amongst them, who say that they never said words, they only said crying. It was just like loud bechiyas, it wasn't actually words. But the Gemara starts right away, and the Gemara says, my amran, what did they say? Amar Rav says, Vaila Azla, Vaila Chavila. Woe to the one who's going, and woe to the Chavila, the package. Now, what exactly that means is Shaila. And then the Gemara over here goes on and brings Amar Rav, Nashi the Shchinziv, the women of Shchinziv, who were witty, sharp women. This is clear from Gemaras in a few different places. Chazal, as a matter of fact, seem to have not been so fond of the people of Shchinziv. But the Nashi the Shchinziv, they had a particular Hespedim. Amr, they would say, Hachi, Vaila Azla, Vaila Chavila. And then the Gemara brings a few more of these cryptic, closed-in quotes that the Nashi the Shchinziv would say. They almost seem like nonsense in the Gemara over here. It's meaning Pashim Pshat makes it's very hard to read. And amongst the Rishonim, there's big chilukei deis as to what exactly the Pshat is. It's far from clear what the Pshat is, and they're like remuzim that mean something. But Akapanim, the Gemara brings down over here a handful between 5 and 10 hespedim, so to speak, or witty lines that these women would say at Levayos of people. So clearly from the Gemara, from the pashtus of the Gemara, if you just open the Gemara and write Katan Daf Chav Ches, it sounds like women were giving Hespedim of some variety or another at Levayos. As a matter of fact, it sounds like that was the standard of the Hesped. And at Kedekach, the Gemara in Ksubis, when it talks about how to divvy up a person's finances, and it says about paying for his funeral, it says that you're not allowed to withhold the money for the Mekainanais, for the women who are doing the crying, the calling at the Levaya. This is what the Gemara in Ksubis says. And as is gebracht in Shulchan Aruch, it's paskin like that in Shulchan Aruch when in regards to divvying up money. And this din also of Nashim b'mayid ma'anis avleim etapchas is also paskin in Shulchan Aruch. So 2 times in Shulchan Aruch, this common occurrence of the women being maspid is brought down. Now the problem is as follows: the Toras Yisrael raises this point first. He asks the kasha. We find that he writes as follows. The Toras Yisrael is a kasha he brings from his father actually. He says as follows. 1 second, sorry. Toras Yisrael brings a kasha as follows. The Gemara in Sukkah that we spoke about weeks ago, when the Makar from Mechitzas, the Gemara over there in Sukkah, in the end of Sukkah, when it looks to bring the Makar from Mechitzas, the Gemara says the Makar is from a pasuk that describes the Avelis, L'Asid Lavei, after Mashiach when Yosef is killed. And it says that the women and the men are going to be maspid independently. They're each one's in their own section as they're being maspid. Now, from that Gemara, it sounds like that even b'shas misa, there's some sort of taiva, some sort of issue of taiva, and you need to keep the women and the men segregated. Even at a tragic time, at a hesped time, it seems like you still have to keep the women separated. Mitzad Sheni, the Gemara in Bracha seems to say, it says la'olim yargiz adam yetzer taiva yetzer hara. Person should always wage war his yetzer taiva his yetzer hara. Im natzchay mutav, if his yetzer taiva won so good, v'im lav yikra kriyishma. Im natzchay mutav, v'im lav yaska leyem emisin. The Gemara sounds like the checkmate for the yetzer hara is yaska leyem emisa. Yem emisa is the checkmate. So the Toras Yisrael's father asked, is it like the Gemara in Sukkah, that even b'shas misa, even at the time of the Hesped, there's taiva, and then everybody said this Gemara might cut in shver? Or is it yaspid like yaskal yem misa? That's the ultimate checkmate, and there's nothing. So to which he brings, and he says as follows. He says the teretz is, he says, when does the Gemara in Sukkah say there's a chash of taiva? Is k'she'ein meisei mutal lefanav. When your mace is not mamash in front of you. The Hesped on Mashiach ben Yosef is being done like rounds and rounds of Avelis, meaning the Mashiach ben Yosef is done, and there's Avelis, there's a Shiva and a Shloshim, meaning it's rounds and rounds of Hespedim. He's not lying there, the meat in front of you. But when the meat is in front of you, mamash, the meat is in front of a person, then like the Gemara says over here, then there's no chash of Kol Bisha Erva, there's no chash of Taiva, and a woman's allowed to be making Hespedim. Which the Toras Yisrael says, Ani b'noi v'talmidei lo hevanti divrei kadshay, d'harei afilu liznos chashinon. As Gemara Kedushin Dafpei Amid Beis. The Gemara, when it talks the sugya of Yichud and Dafpei and then the Kedushin, the Gemara says even b'shas Levaya Mamish, it sounds like Choshish, and there's rules about how many people go out together, what the groupings have to be. So it sounds like the Chash. To which the Toras Yisrael ends up making a chilik and says, could be that's after the Levaya is done. The Chash is that after the Levaya is done and people are still in compromising situations, it could happen. But during the Levaya itself, it sounds like from the Gemara in Brachas and from this Gemara in Moed Katan that there's no Chash for Hirer, for Kol V'Yisha Erva, and therefore women could be giving Hespedim. So Medina the Gemara. This is how it sounds like. Now the problem is, what about Kol Bisha Erva? What about the fact that a woman's now allowed to raise her voice in some sort of loud way for people to hear? So there's a big need in the Rishonim of Kol Bisha Erva is only singing, not singing. But L'maisa, it sounds like for most Rishonim that we hold, Kol Bisha Erva is not only for singing, and therefore it's relevant over here. To which the Chsan Sefer in his Sefer says as follows. He says, nearly the Kol Bisha Erva hainu dafka dibur shebami terchavas halevu kedema. Dafka a dibur that comes from Archavas Halev or something like that. Aval shala atzvus bevadei lekik peda. The Chsan Sefer says when it comes from a sad koil, a crying voice, a crying koil, there's no Isser of Kol V'Yisha Erva. This is what the Chsan Sefer says. Now others disagree. Obviously, there are those who say ad kedei kach that maybe the Mishnah means there are women who are mekainin for the women and men who are mekainin for the men. And the Rambam when he talks about paying the mekainim, the Rambam says ein moinim schar ha mekaininim v'ha mekaininois. You don't hold back the schar of the criers and the criers in female. So it sounds like maybe according to some Rishonim that there's two groupings. Lamaisa, others are madcha and say no, that can mean lavdafka, and every time the pasuk Sukkim and Yirmi refer to the mekaininois, and every time the Gemara in Moed Katan and the Gemara in Ksubas refers to it, always says mekaininois, female criers. It sounds like there never is male criers. So what's interesting is that this is a sugya where it's kemat mefurish, pachas yaser mefurish from the Gemara that women were giving Hespedim. It's kemat clear from the Gemara that women were giving Hespedim. Now, where did that minhag go? When did that minhag stop? What happened to that minhag? So that's the nidim, because we know that certainly a few hundred years ago it was very uncommon, and when the Satmar Rebbe is writing this tshuva, it's far from common to have women giving Hespedim. So where did that minhag go? So the Satmar in his tshuva, it's in Yeridei and some Tzaddik Tes, he says as follows: Avol kol ha-minhag hazeh shel nashim mekaininois. This whole minhag of women being mekaininois, kvar nisvatimol mikadmas dina. It was already nisvatel much earlier. It's not for nothing. Midaris HaKayim from the pre Gederis. Shahayu minhageim chacham manigayim chachamim abirim shleinasim b'mkayim shum davar ela yidei atzasam. Because the Gedolim who were in charge of the minhagim them were gross Gedolim, wouldn't do anything. No one would do anything without asking them. Ve'ein safek shero b'zeh takala sheyef shalasis havdalah v'afrasha karoi. It's pasha to me. He says that they saw that having women giving Hespedim was leading to mixing of the genders. V'darkan shalom ligmul chasadim v'leil chaveis hameis v'ikach shasha tuva b'haramas koil denashi kederis mismatin v'holchem b'pirtzach. Apirtzah the ders were getting worse and worse with pirtzach. Apirtzah umagam b'dar aparatz hazesh and nifritz b'miluya b'vanisein harabim shechalila lahani michadash inin kazesh kvanisvatam b'kamaderis chalila to be manning a new minig of women giving Hespedim, something that was nisvata kamaderis l'fanein she'gedelim v'ktoshim v'le'ach shadara v'af b'isa the reis and mitzinu kamapam b'shas v'paiske minig oikar halacha. For sure, something that was only a minig, we could say minig oikar halacha, and the minig of women giving Hespedim should be nekar. It was properly nekar, and it doesn't deserve to be reinstated. So, the Satmar Rebbe is not enlightening us at all on where the minig went. Meaning, we know Medina the Gemara, and Kamat from all the raid that's on this Gemara, from all the Rishonim that handle it, it seems to be that this is the pashas of the Gemara, and the Teres Yisrael Mashal is struggling with it, and etc. But we know that somewhere along the line, the minig vanished. And more than likely, because of what the Satmar Rebbe is saying, that somewhere along the line, the Gedolim felt that the Deiris were not ready for this anymore, and they took away this, this minig. Now, what's interesting is regards to the shaila of women giving speeches. I'm not talking in particular about by Levayos, but giving speeches b'chlal. Rav Moshe actually has 2 times in the Chuvas where he references it. One is in the famous Chuvah that we spoke about a few weeks ago about Bas Mitzvahs. When Rav Moshe talks about Bas Mitzvahs in one of the Chuvas, he says, Hagam that it's nothing, and it's nish wichtig, and it's just a birthday party, and it's not important, and whatever he says there, he says, but make it, if you're doing it already, make it Yiddish, and he says it's okay that the girl who just became Bas Mitzvah should say a few words for the Olam that's gathered there about, the Mailas Hayoim and whatever it is. So Ramesh is referring to a girl who just became a Gedolah, talking in front of a tzibur. Now, you could be madcha that it's only girls at the Bas Mitzvah. Ramesh doesn't say that. It's pashas, it's a family event. Maybe it's only family, maybe it's only krevim. You could figure out an eitzah. Now, that's one place. The other place in Ramesh in a later tshuva, in Archaim Chelekei and Tshuva Yid Beis, Ramesh has a shayla about a shul. On Friday night, they would want them to come learn. They had a learning program. Men and women would come learn, and someone would say a shir, a chumash shir. Now, the men and women would sit bar vuvya. It's mashma from the tshuva. They would sit. It's obviously a very modern shul. And the shayla was, they do a rotation where different people say the shir, and they wanted to know, could women get on the rotation? Could women be on the rotation who are giving the chumash shir also? Meaning the shemim are all there. Could the women be part of the rotation? And Ramesh says, I'm not going to talk about the fact that you guys are sitting bar vuvya, which is a big problem. But that's not what you asked me, so I'm not talking about that. But you asked me about the women joining the rotation to saying the shir. He says, provided that it's not birigilus, and it's not in a shul, and it's he has a third condition. He has 3 conditions. Provided it's a like bootleg situation, it's not so terrible. It's okay if women say the shir once in a while. So Moshe allows them, if they take the shir out of shul, put it like in the simcha hall or in a house or whatever, and it's done with some sort of stipulations and shmiras. Moshe allows it. So Moshe is not so against, in some context or another, women giving speeches, whatever that means. Now he never handles the shaila of Levayos particular, but women giving speeches. Now another interesting occurrence that I came across is Rav Henkin Zainikel, who we've quoted from in the past, the shaila Shuvas B'nai Banim, who's a very liberal Rav, good Shuvas, but a very liberal Rav. In Chele Gimel, he has a tshuva over there about a talmidah of his who's writing to him that she's getting married, and it really bothers her that she's not going to be able to be mechabed any of her Rebbetzins with kibudim by the chuppah. Why are all the kibudim going to the men? She wants to be mechabed some of her Rebbetzins, some of her Rebbetzins, her chaveris with kibudim by the chuppah. And yeah, this is the shayla. And he handles the whole Indian, and he's very gentle, and he tells her that to do things that shock the sensibility and the conscience of the tzibur is not acceptable. And he says, Kayidua, the Chavos Yair that we spoke about weeks ago about Kaddish, the Chavos Yair says, any sort of shinui minig like this is not okay. He says, but I am sympathetic to your needs, and I want to try to think of which kibudim you could possibly give. He comes up with that a woman could do kriyas ksuba. He does say, this is what he said, he does say, word to the wise, please warn the Rabbanim who are coming to Misad Kedushin or whatever, that you're going to call a woman to do kriyas ksuba, because if you don't warn them, I could see this going very poorly. I could see this going sideways in a hurry, and you don't want the chuppah to be ruined. It's an interesting tshuva. Now, it's not for us halacha l'maisa, but it's another interesting tshuva that I found discussing a similar question. Now, there is a shtickle Einfall that I came across. You'll tell me what you think. You'll tell me if you think I'm right or not. This is I didn't see anyone shell this too, but there's a shaila in Simon Reish Ayin Test in Yeridei about giving Hespedim on women. I think it's Reish Shinayin Test. Somewhere in the end of your day, there's a shaila about giving a spadim on women. Now the Gemara might cut in handles. Do you do it b'rachayv? And today there's a big tumult if you do it in shuls or not, right? Let's say could the Rebbetzin of a Rosh Yeshiva be in the main Beis Medrash of the yeshiva? Could a Rebbetzin of a Rebbe be in the Beis Medrash? There's shilas and there's rules, and every kihil has their own rules. How you give women's hespedim is a whole shaila. Now, one of the makaris that the Prisha brings down about how to give a woman a hesped comes from the Maril, Menhagim Maril. Now, I want to read you the words of these Maril and tell me what you think. Now, just stand before we go into this. The Maril is one of the Gedolei Hadei Reis, not Gedolei Hadei, one of the Gedolei Hadei Reis, meaning a gadol of an all-time gadol. He's referred to as the Avi Minig Ashkenaz. Many, it's innumerable how many Menhagim in the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah come from the Maril. The Maril is right at that borderline between the Rishonim and Achronim, called like the capstone on the Rishonim is Menhagim, and like the certifier of the Yadus of the Achronim. Maril is Migdalei Hadei Reis. He's referred to in the Chuvas Maril as Gad Ladar, openly referred to as Gad Ladar, etc. Now the Maril had a second wife that he married. Her name was Gimchen. I don't know what the Hebrew name is. It's a German name. Her name was Gimchen. Maril was married to a woman named Gimchen, and it seems they had a very nice marriage. In the Likutim over here, in the end of the Minhagim Maril, it brings something as follows. Mari Segel, that's the Maril. When he would talk about his wife with other people, he would call her, when he would talk about her, not to her, to other people, he would call her my Hoizfrei. Kedisa Perikal Kisve, Miyamil Karasi Lishti Ishti. Fine. And then he brings right over here. When he would call her, Amr B'Lashon Ashkenaz, he would say in Yiddish, Hertir nisht. Kederach oilim shazugim maskirim shemeseim kishakarim ze'azeh. Like couples don't call each other by the name; they call each other you. It's more personal. Now the Talmidim are recording his interactions with his wife, which is interesting. It's a fascinating thing. Like they're showing you the texture of his marriage. And then when he would talk to her one on one, he would talk to her in third person, as putting her on a pedestal, as if he was talking to like a whole tzibur. Because she was an alman and he wanted to be mechaber. So the Maril had like a nice second marriage to Maras Gimchen. She died only 1 year before him. The nusach of her matzeva is actually the Maril wrote by his own hand, and it's in here also in the end of Hilchos Machas in Minhag Maril. It says Yarda Mayim Eini Olah Ala Teres Paz Mini Nafla Kamu B'Nois V'Yashrula B'Sharim Gam. It's a whole like nice poem over here that he wrote her. The Maril wrote like the nusach of her matzeva. Fine. Then there's something interesting. In Ois Chaf Beis, in Hilchos Machas, in Minhagim Maril, it says as follows. And there's two girsayos to this, but the Prisha brings this girsa. The Prisha in Yerdei brings this girsa. It says as follows. Kisheniftera Eishes Mari Segel, shenesva mimenu shana achas koydem p'tirase. When Mari Segel's wife, Maris Gimchen, was nifter, who died 1 year before him, nisvaksha hilu yeshiva shamala b'chodesh elul kuf peizayin leprat b'vermaiza in Worms. He was nisvaksha ve'ishtei nifter b'magenza. She was nifter in Magenza. So it says as follows: Kisheniftera halach l'cheder. He went to the room. He was crying in a loud voice. And he said, "Atem nashim tesayuni lahaspid ishti ateres reishi." You women will help me to give a hesped on my wife ateres reishi ashenaflu mimenu. Now I don't know what to make of that line. I'm wondering if this is a line if the Maril is asking the women, his wife's friends, whoever they are, his wife's chaverim, to either say something. Maybe he's just asking them to help him prepare. Tell me nice things. It's like a cryptic line in the Maril, in the Menhagim Maril. Stam interessant. I didn't see anyone shtal tzu. Perhaps this is another example of women giving a spadim. I don't know. I'm looking to try to like mark when the minig went away, when it was still existing. The Maril is a chveis, 550, close to 600 years ago. I wonder if this is another example of the minig still existing, of the nashim mekayninis, and the Maril telling them, "Atem nashim tesayuni lahasped ishti." You'll help me be masped my wife. Meaning you'll say a line, you'll say Samaila, Malyusi, you'll say something. I don't know. I'm just putting it out there. It's a question. I don't know how much more time we have. There's one more like attached. We have time? 5 more minutes. We have one more attached minig to women hespedim, is the famous nidin if women go to the Beis HaKvaros or not. Now this is very, very much minhagei kehilas today. What's interesting is that some of the most makbid on it are the goyins mentioned, the real litvaks. And that's because the goyin in the Geras Hagra that he wrote to his wife when he thought he was going to Eretz Yisrael, when he was attempting to go to Eretz Yisrael. So he wrote a famous letter to his wife. It's a Geras Hagra. It's printed. People read it, right? Whatever. And in there, when he's giving her instructions on how to run the household, how to do the chinuch, how to do a Shabbos Suda, it's very fascinating read, a great read on its own. In there, he tells her, and don't ever go to the Beis HaKvaros, ever. He says, don't go to the Beis HaKvaros because all the bad things come from women going to Beis HaKvaros. Everything bad comes from women going to Beis HaKvaros. So the Goyin was now, granted, there's more than one version, more than one Ksav Yad of the Igeres HaGra also, and not every version of the Igeres HaGra has this line in there, but at least some of them do. And because of that, many Goyin mention, people have medactic on the Goyin, like the Goyin, were super makbid for women not to go to the Beis HaKvaros. So many Litvisha would be very makbid not to go to the Beis HaKvaros. Incidentally, today, it's hard to say who is, who isn't. I think there's all different kehilas. Everyone can tell me what, But Lamashal, the Rav Chaim, the Briskirov, the Chazanish, the Stipler, none of these people would let their women or women that asked them go to the Beis HaKvaros because of the Goy. Because the Goy said that all the bad things that happen come from the Beis HaKvaros. Now, where does this come from? So it's very interesting. It's another one of these things that Medina the Gemara, it sounds like it's mamash pashit that women could go, and later on it changes. Now, how is that? Because the Gemara in Sanhedrin in the Chaf says as follows. The Gemara says like this. It's a stam Gemara in the Chaf and Aleph. The Gemara says like this. Tanar Rabbanon. Makam shenagu nashim latzis achar mita yotzis lefnei amita yotzis. Whatever the minig is. If the minig is women go before the bed, they should do that. If they go after the bed, they should go after the bed. Now, Taisvis over here in Sanhedrin brings something interesting. Taisvis brings nashim latzis lefnei amita. The kivin the shas tzarhu lekel lemechash lehir. We don't have to be chayshish v'hir if the women are going lefnei the mita and all the men are following them. Ubi Yerushalmi pligi, in the Yerushalmi it brings a machlekes. Ikelam andam lefnei amita. It's not because it's like a pride of place for them. It's lifisha garmu misa la'olam, because women cause death on the world. So we send them. You go first. You lead the procession because you cause death to the world. And the other minig is that it's a gnai for women that men should be following them and looking at them. So we do it this way. So the Gemara Sanhedrin brings two different days. It sounds like both of them are good lahalacha. And in Shulchan Aruch, in Yeridea, in Hilchas Avelus, the Shulchan Aruch Taka brings down both of these minhagim. It says as follows. It says, Makam shenagu latzis nashim lefnei amita yotzis, Makam shenagu latzis la'achar mita yotzis. The Achshav says the Shulchan Aruch, Nagu she'ein yotzis el la'achar mita ve'en l'shanis. Now the minig is they go after the bed and ve'en l'shanis. Now here's the twist. That's Sif Aleph in Siman Shin and Test. Sif Beis is as follows. Sakta Mechaber, Yesh limnoya milatzis nashim Beis HaKvaros achar mita. You should be meineya women from going to the Beis HaKvaros after the mita. Now, this is mamish, like it doesn't clap Aleph to Beis. I'm saying, Aleph says, there's two minhagim for the Gemara in Sanhedrin, and ein l'shanis. Do the minig that's more prevalent, and ein l'shanis. If Beis, the Mechaber brings, they shouldn't go. Now, where's he coming from? The Mechaber's coming from the Beis Yosef. And the Beis Yosef in Shin and Test, the Beis Yosef brings down a Zoyar, in Parshas Vayakel, I believe, that basically says that when women go to the Beis HaKvaros, the Malach HaMavos is merakid b'seicham. Malach HaMavos is merakid amongst the group of the women, and anybody who the Malach HaMavos makes eye contact with. Now, you don't know that you're making eye contact with him, but you might be making eye contact with him. Anybody the Malach HaMavos makes eye contact with is doomed. And that's why Roiv Puranius, that people die, they don't even die because they're supposed to, they die because they made eye contact with the Malach HaMavos. You open yourself up. The minute you make eye contact with him, that's it, it's trouble. And this is what the Zohar seems to say in Parashat Vayakel, and the Beis Yosef brings this down in Mamish 2 lines. And because of that, the Mechaber seems to say, Yesh l'mnayim milatzis nashim. Now the problem is that doesn't resolve the stira. Meaning, okay, now we know what the Makar is, where the Mechaber is coming from, and where maybe the Goyin is coming from, but what does the Mechaber want you to do? He says both minhagim mamish back to back. Now because of this, the Machlekes HaPoskim had to learn this. The Beis Hillel and the Beis Yaakov, Chuvas Beis Yaakov, and the Chai Adam, that seems to be the consensus of most Poskim is, some say that the Mechaber is bringing both minhagim tak. He's bringing the minig of the Gemara, and he's also bringing the minig of the Zohar, and he's telling you, whichever camp you're part of. If you're a Dina de Gemara type of person, so then do the Dina de Gemara. If you're a Dina de Desire person, do Dina de Desire. That's what some say. Others say, and this seems to be the more popular consensus amongst the Achronim, is that there's a distinction between participating by a Levaya, and going to a Beis HaKvaros. Going to a Beis HaKvaros, it seems to be where the Malach HaMavos picks up, starts draying with the passy of women, and that's where he follows them home, and that's where he makes eye contact. So it sounds like the Mechaber is saying women can participate in Levayos, but they don't go all the way to the Beis HaKvaros. And Taka, this is the minig in Yerushalayim for sure, but in many other kehilas, that women could go to Levaya. They stand outside wherever they go to Levaya, but they don't go to the Beis HaKvaros. Now, whatever, I just wanted to, there's much more to do on this, and there's big machlekes HaPoskim if it's at all times, or it's only during when they're in Nida, you may Libuna, you may Tara, various different machlekes. I just wanted to, we shouldn't leave without mentioning it, that there exists another big machlekes when it comes to Levayos with how women's participation is. Okay, in Mitzvah Hashem, we're going to move on to something Chanukah related. It might still have to do with women, but it'll be Chanukah related.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.